So, Jeff, you have two things that I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about tonight, and we'll open it up. The one is the the reserve currency, so and the fiat currency, and the fact that we were basically able to finance all this massive, $1.5 trillion a year without tax increases, and so it makes it silences the political debate. You, as an economist, you have you can describe that, but this is something that we keep coming back to. So, could you speak to that?
Very basically, the U.S. public debt, as you know, has risen from 35% of GDP in the year 2000. This is the debt owed to the public, not including the debt owned by the Federal Reserve. From 35% of GDP in 2000 to 98% of GDP now. And the Congressional Budget Office has a technical projection which says on current policies, how will this evolve? And the answer is it reaches 190% of GDP by 2052. I have the number slightly unsure, but it's 182% or 190%. In other words, we're on a completely unstable, unacceptable policy. The reason is that we don't fund spending, and we haven't funded these wars since 9/11. So there have been at least $5 trillion direct costs of the wars, and arguably $7 or $8 trillion costs of the wars, not any of which was paid by anything. We don't like taxes in this country. We grew up with John Locke's philosophy put into the Constitution by James Madison, and the idea was protect rich people from having to pay taxes. Okay, so we don't pay taxes. We spend a lot of money. The debt is soaring, and no one wants to do much about it at all. But for a long time, interest rates were near zero, so it looked to be free. Now, you know that that would end when leading economists explain that it will continue forever. So Larry Summers and Jason Furman wrote an article in 2018 or 2019, why interest rates would remain low for the next generation, basically. And that was the signal that it was over. And indeed, it's over. So we're now in a high interest rate environment and probably a rising real interest rate environment. The international role of the dollar definitely facilitated the lower costs of borrowing. That is the exorbitant privilege of the dollar that de Gaulle talked about in the early 1960s. If you are the reserve currency, it means that other countries hold your foreign exchange reserves as their forex reserves. It means that private actors hold your dollars. It means that your $100 bills are widely used and so forth. And it's not, by the way, the dollar is maybe the currency of settlement for 60 or 65% of transactions. It's not 100% of transactions by any means, but it's held at a high level. It's coming to an end. And it's coming to an end for actually three reasons. One is that it was based on an extraordinarily large role of the U.S. economy in the world from 1945. That was very unusual, but we were not only the last one standing in 1945, we were the one that had developed a massive economy during the war, undamaged except for one day, December 7th, 1941. Other than that, it was all building. And so we were we were the creditor, and we were dominant and technologically dominant, and it was an extraordinarily unusual situation. And gradually it faded away, and with the rise of China in the last 40 years, that accelerated the normal rebalancing of the world. So that's one reason that it's diminishing. A second reason that it's diminishing is that it is based on the U.S. banking system and SWIFT payments and so forth. And the banking system is not going to be the center of payment settlements mechanically in the future, because we're moving to digital settlements of all kinds, including central bank digital currencies. So even that mechanism is going away. But then there's a third factor which has accelerated everything. If you want others to use your currency, my advice is don't confiscate their money. And the U.S. doesn't get that. So we keep taking other people's dollars away. This is a bad idea. And we do it as a habit because the president can do it on his own by a signature. So we took $300 billion of Russian assets and seized them. And we have, I think Larry Summers is one of them, and Financial Times and others, we should not only freeze that, but take all of that. It's unbelievable to me. We're the country of John Locke, supposedly. There's supposed to be private property and rule of law and whatever. Okay, we don't accept any, we don't believe any of that. And in fact, you're a Russian, and you probably know Putin. Okay, we're going to take your apartment. We're going to take your boat. We're going to take your bank account. We're doing this, of course. It's unbelievably stupid. But we're doing that with Venezuela. We decided one day, this was one of our genius foreign policy acts, Maduro, you're no longer president. We like Guaido, you're president now. And so you had foreign exchange reserves. Well, you don't have them anymore. Mr. Guaido, now you have the foreign exchange reserves. And we did it with Afghanistan on the way out, and we do it with Iran. Okay, they're getting the idea maybe we shouldn't leave our money in dollars. And that has accelerated tremendously with the BRICS. So the BRICS already, when there were 5, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they were already larger than the G7. And they completely get the idea dollars is not the best bet. Now there are 6 more in the BRICS: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Iran. The BRICS, measured in purchasing power adjusted prices for output, constitute 37% of world economy, and the G7, 30%. And the BRICS have decided in their last meeting, okay, we're going to non-dollar payments. And why not? And they will, by the way, because I used to invent new monies for a living, the Estonian kroon and the Slovene tolar. And I can tell you, you can make a new money. It takes about a weekend, actually. You have to know a little bit of monetary economics, but you can do that. You don't need dollars to make real economy transactions. So they'll move out of the dollar. So this is going to accelerate. And it means, from every point of view, we'll face more and more of the balance of payments constraints that all other countries face. Higher interest rates, less ease of borrowing, and it doesn't help that we shut down the government or try to shut down the government every other week. So we keep getting our credit ratings knocked down also. And we don't like taxes in this country under any circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a group that also doesn't like taxes, but actually you can't live without taxes. We have to pay our bills. And we're actually not going to end Social Security, and we're not going to end Medicare and so on. I don't think we should, but if you do, it's not going to happen also. And so we have to actually pay our bills in the end. And we don't like that. So our debt is soaring. It's not good for us. Add in another, why don't we have a war with China? That seems to be popular in this town. We could really get the debt boosted to oblivion very quickly. All of this means that this is a rapidly obsolescing bargain, this borrowing on the cheap. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And so it's going to require us to actually think about things as a society that we do want to do and don't want to do. One of the things we shouldn't want to do is to have 800 overseas military bases in 80 countries. This is the most ridiculous, provocative, dangerous, ineffectual policy of all.
I think we have 173 countries who have special forces. That's
Yeah.
why they appear in Mali and Niger and Chad and
Yeah.
other. But I wanted to observe that, the president is able to freeze all this money, engage in theft, because the Congress, again, they passed the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It doesn't define economic emergency. President says whatever he wants it to mean.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I got involved in one situation where he froze the $7 billion in the Afghan central bank account. Then he says that the reason did it is the emergency was because of the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Then, in the same order, he
Caused by seizing their bank balances.
right. Then he says that he's setting aside half of the $7 billion to pay the judgment creditors of the Taliban. Okay, you're relieving them of a $3.5 billion debt, the Taliban, which remains on the terrorist list. But again, I trace it back to Congress, again, has given away the store.
Absolutely.
The president does whatever he wants.
Absolutely. Congress plays no role at all in foreign policy, at all. And so there's no discussion, no debate, no understanding, and no care at all. Everything,
Right.
by the way, absolutely, I guarantee you, President Xi faces a lot more political deliberation, dialogue, and restraint than Joe Biden. So when Joe Biden says that's a dictator, I'll tell you, if you look at how China really works, it's a lot more deliberation, a lot more people involved, a lot more restraint, a lot more collaborative policy making. This policy is made, we don't know exactly who makes it, but it is absolutely not made in public, and it has nothing to do with Congress, and they don't give a damn for some reason that it's in the Constitution that they have. That's why we have a parliament, after all, was to stop the princes from doing this kind of damage. That was the whole history of parliamentarism, was that you don't get to do wars by stroke of a pen, and that's what we're doing.
Jeff, we've got to get you to talk about the pandemic, because you have unique things to say. Can you describe? We talked about it. If you could summarize how you got into this whole issue of the virus and the role of the military and Fauci and NIH in the COVID-19 story.
Yeah, one fun story after another. But basically, I have been involved from the financial side in financing the fight against epidemic diseases for the last quarter century, and I designed, actually, or first recommended some of the programs here, PEPFAR and the President's Malaria Initiative and so forth, were ideas that I proposed because I like to fight diseases so that they don't kill people. And when COVID broke out, because of that record, I was asked by the British medical journal, The Lancet, which has a tradition of having kind of blue ribbon commissions on important public health topics, to chair a commission on COVID-19. And I said that I would do so mainly to look at what should the response be financial issues of the vaccine and so forth. And one of the task forces that I created as part of this commission was on the origin of the virus. So it was one of the 10 commissions, not one of the 10 task forces. And the long and the short of it is I got incredibly steeply involved in the arcana of the debate of where the virus came from. And to cut to the chase, the virus overwhelmingly likely came out of a lab rather than out of nature, and probably out of a U.S. lab, but a U.S. lab working with Wuhan, because we had very extensive work together between U.S. laboratories, especially NIH in-house, University of North Carolina, and Rocky Mountain Laboratory. And there was a lot of untoward and dangerous work underway. And just to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning I believed the Nature story because an early article appeared called The Proximal Origins of SARS-CoV-2 in Nature Medicine in March 2020, and I read it. I said, well, these are all famed virologists and make sense to me, so it's Nature. And they said, irrefutably cannot have come from a lab. That paper is scientific fraud, nothing less than fraud. Not a mistake, fraud. And the reason it's fraud is that the authors knew as they wrote that they could not make those conclusions. They didn't necessarily know where it came from or whether it was natural or lab, but they could not have said the things that they said absolutely 100%. And so we know now, because of Freedom of Information Act release of their emails, that they knew it too. And the paper, even today, has not yet been retracted. But the long and the short of it is the following. I know many people know this story. It took me a long time to understand it forensically by being tutored by a lot of scientists and who helped me through this literature. Basically, when SARS-1 came in 2003-4 in Hong Kong, it died out on its own. And the reason that it did was that it was not so infectious. It was a beta coronavirus that wasn't so infectious. There was a long incubation period till infection. By the time a person was infectious, they had symptoms galore. So isolating people was enough to drive what we call the basic reproduction number below 1, and the epidemic killed a couple thousand people. I don't remember the number, but it stopped. This virus is highly contagious, as everybody knows, and it has a short incubation period, and it has a asymptomatic infectious period, which is quite unusual. So the third or fourth day after the original Wuhan virus infection, you might not show symptoms, but you're already shedding virus and infectious. Now, why? The big difference of SARS-1 and SARS-CoV-2 is a piece of the virus called the furin cleavage site. And it is 4 amino acids which help to split the spike protein so that it can enter the cell. That furin cleavage site was already tested in 2005 as something that would make a beta coronavirus more infectious. So it was already understood, and a real genius at North Carolina who's in Fauci's shop named Ralph Barrick already in 2005 said, you know, this is not bad for bio, quote, defense. You know what that means. because it has these properties. So this idea of the furin cleavage site was already in focus of research almost 20 years ago. Now, fast forward, Barrick developed a lot of very sophisticated technology that enabled him to do that enables him and Wuhan to do the following. You know there are 30,000 base pairs in SARS-CoV-2, the nucleic acids which define the genome, which define the virus. They are letters, A, G, C, G, and so on, of the bases of this RNA. Now, Barrick, who's very clever, if you give him not a virus, but you give him 30,000 letters, he will make a live virus from that. That's quite a trick, actually. That's not easy. Knowing the sequence doesn't mean that you can make a virus, but he created, over the last 10 years, something called the reverse genetic system. That's his term for it, to go from the letters to the actual live infectious virus. Then he developed something called a consensus virus. Very interesting. Which is if you have 10 of these beta coronaviruses, they'll differ in some of their nucleic acids, nucleotides. But what he would do is like stretch them out on an Excel spreadsheet and take each letter in each place that appears the most across the 10. And he called that a consensus virus. So he would make a new virus that never appeared in nature that's the consensus of the 10 that were collected. Very clever. The world's leading expert on beta coronaviruses. So he, from 2000, and he was in Fauci's shop, vaccines, this, that, all sorts of things, but especially gain-of-function research, because he wanted to test which of these viruses would really be infectious. How would it work? What if you have a furin cleavage site? What if you don't have a furin cleavage site? What if you have this piece, that piece? That's what he could do with his system. Who did he train? Shi Zhengli, the bat lady is the expression, the one that heads Wuhan Institute of Virology, studied under Barrick. And EcoHealth Alliance is an umbrella funding body which funds these different units. So yours truly, me, who did I appoint to head my task force? The head of EcoHealth Alliance. I said, this guy must know. Of course, what he knew was exactly what not to tell me and not to tell the rest, which was how much of this work was going on. That took a lot of tutoring of me by outsiders to explain, you really did put the fox in charge of the hen house. You have to understand what's really going on, which was explained to me. So fast forward, in 2017, a research proposal was made called the Diffuse Project under EcoHealth Alliance, and it was a proposal to the Defense Department, to DARPA. And it was a partnership of University of North Carolina and Wuhan Institute of Virology. And the idea, there are lots of ideas in it. You can find it online because a whistleblower posted it online. That's the only reason we have it. But it says on page 10 that we have 180 previously unreported SARS-like viruses. These are beta coronaviruses from bats. And on page 11, it says, we're going to test these for furin cleavage sites. And when there aren't furin cleavage sites, we're going to stick them in to see what happens. So there are hundreds of beta coronaviruses that have been collected from bats, but there's only one ever that has a furin cleavage site. That is SARS-CoV-2. So it appeared somehow, strangely enough, Well, it was the furious target of research, is how it appeared. And in 2019, it seems very likely, not for sure, one of two things. One, that it was developed in the United States, tested in the US, and then sent to Wuhan because they have a bat collection to see whether it would infect those bats, because we don't have the same bats in captivity. But we tested it because of an academic stray paper that by Barrick and the head of Rocky Mountain Lab, which is an NIH unit, that showed a certain Wuhan virus couldn't infect Egyptian fruit bats. Do you care? Well, that's the bat that they have in Rocky Mountain Lab, but that's not the bats that is most of relevant. We need the bats in Yunnan province. So one hypothesis is that the virus was made in Rocky Mountain Lab, and it was sent on a piece of filter paper to Wuhan to test with their bats in captivity to see how infectious it is, and it leaked in the fall of 2019, late 2019. The other idea is that when DARPA turned down the Diffuse project, it went ahead in Wuhan, either with our knowledge or without our knowledge. That's the second hypothesis. We don't know. But I'll tell you something interesting. The Democrats are working full time to stop us from knowing. They are objecting to any congressional investigation. I'm a Democrat. I used to be. I'm not part of any party anymore. I can't stand them. But Rand Paul asked me to help him convince Democratic senators that know me that we should look into this. They will not look into this. They are blocking even an investigation, subpoenas, lab records, anything. They don't want to know. And then a very interesting story about 8 weeks ago. Again, I've not tracked it down. I'm not following this day to day, and I'm not privy to the House investigation that is going on under the Republican leadership. But you may have seen that a CIA whistleblower came forward about 6 weeks ago because Biden tasked the intelligence community to look at the origin. What did the public get out of this one page? Okay? But the CIA was on the side that it was probably natural. And this whistleblower came forward and said, yeah, we were 7 people. 6 of us said it probably was lab, and my other 5 were bribed by the CIA to reverse their vote. And he made this public, and the committee has now called CIA officials to explain the background to the CIA internal decision. DOE has said, because of Lawrence Livermore labs, probably from a lab. And my own guess is, well over 90% that this is lab, maybe even significantly closer to 100%. And without question, the U.S. was deeply engaged in the research, and Fauci did not tell the truth at all from the first day about this, because from February 1 onward, they knew that this was really a possibility, that this came from a lab, and they never told the truth to the public. And so this is a dreadful story, and 18 million estimated deaths since the start of this, and we don't even try to find out in the Senate. You can't get any investigation going at all. And by the way, the newspapers have been shockingly devoid of content on this. I know I'll say a word about the New York Times, my erstwhile favorite newspaper, which I can't read anymore, on everything. But on this one, I spent hours with the reporter. They would not say one word honest about the real basic facts as we know them. And at one point, just a blank out. And then about 6 months ago, another New York Times reporter called me, and I said, okay, I'm going to try again, because he said, we want to look at the story. And so I spent an hour with him. Not a word of that afterwards. So I called another of the scientists who is deeply involved in this, and I complained. I said, I spent an hour with this guy. And he said, Jeff, I spent 5 hours with him yesterday, and not one word. It's phony. Completely phony. They've shut up this story, and it's terrible, because what could be partisan about where a virus came from, for heaven's sake? And the reason it matters is that there is a tremendous amount of ongoing, dangerous work in laboratories around the world, completely outside of any scrutiny at all. It's shocking. There's no system, there's no control, there's no scrutiny, and we can do things with viruses that are terrifying, is what I have learned, and no one is paying a goddamn attention to it.
Well, Jeff, we've gone way over our time. You're an amazing citizen.
Thank you.
And thank you,